Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we are starting with the outcome N3, owning and operating a small business. Now, owning a small business can come with a number of rewards. It can be a very good option for anyone who would like to make their own decisions when it comes to running a business, anything to do with managing a team of employees, setting their own salaries, setting their own hours, being the one in charge of getting goods and services for the store. That can be a great option. At the same time, there are a number of risks involved with running your own business, such as investing your own capital, risking the loss of that capital, the risk of your business not panning out the way that you imagined that it would. So before you get started, here's a few questions you might want to keep in mind before you decide to open a small business. Number one, is it a good idea for me to start a small business? Am I willing to stick with it through uncertainty and tough periods of time? Now, when we say, is it a good idea? What I'm really talking about is, do you have enough money to put into that small business? It is really difficult to start a small business with no money available. There are a number of costs and expenses involved in getting all of your operations up and running. Something else that you want to consider too is, do you have enough time to run that small business? People don't realize how much time it actually takes to start up that small business. You have to put in a lot of man hours on your own before you can start to pay other employees to help you take over certain tasks that you would otherwise have to run on your own. It's never going to be a really smooth road. At the beginning, most business owners will tell you that they had it tough. There's going to be a lot of really depressing days where you think this isn't going to work out and you'll feel like quitting. So, are you willing to stick with it through those periods of time? Number two, will this business make me money in the long run? Now, money isn't everything for everyone, but chances are, if you are in the business of running your own business, you do care about the money somewhat. And at the end of the day, you will need money to keep your business going. If you don't earn any money, your business will go under and you won't have any food on the table. So that is something that you definitely need to keep in mind. Question number three, who will be my potential customers or clients? Is there enough of a demand for my business? Now, if you decide, for example, to start a doggy daycare in beautiful Vegreville, Alberta, you will want to see how many dogs there are in Vegreville. It might be a really nice town, but if there are only 20 dogs in that town of 6,000 people, there is likely no need for some sort of doggy daycare in Vegreville. Now, in addition to those three questions that I've asked, what are three more questions you might want to personally ask yourself? Of course, these are going to differ depending on your own situation. Some of you guys are running or planning on running different businesses, so it really just depends. There is no right or wrong type of question to ask yourself at this time. So speaking of Vegreville, let's talk about Vegreville in this quick example. So for those of you who don't know, Vegreville is a small town of roughly 6,000 people, about 100 kilometers east of Edmonton. It's located on Highway 16A, right off of Highway 16, which is known otherwise as Yellowhead Trail. And it's a major transport corridor that leads east into Saskatchewan and west into the Rocky Mountains and into the rest of British Columbia. One of the primary industries in the Vegreville region is agriculture. The first question here says, what types of businesses would be viable options in Vegreville? Support your choices with sound reasoning. So we want to be thinking, okay, there's lots of transportation happening. There's lots of people who are passing through town, either as transportation workers or perhaps just tourists driving through that area. So what types of businesses would be a good choice? Now, in the class earlier today, some people said possibly a gas station. Some people said maybe a hotel, perhaps a grocery store, or perhaps a tourism stop as well. Something that is relatively unknown for whatever reason. Vegreville is home to the world's largest Ukrainian Easter egg. Again, I'll probably have to fact check that again. It was at one point the largest one in the world, but someone might go ahead and prove me wrong here. So what types of businesses might have a hard time operating in Vegreville? Explain why. Now, for the same reasons that these could be successful businesses, the ones that I've listed above, such as gas stations, hotels, grocery stores, might actually be bad choices as well. Now, the reason why is Vegreville is a relatively well established area of Alberta. Certain businesses might have already been around for a very long period of time. So, for someone to go in there and start up a new business that is related to anything that's already there might be a very difficult endeavor. Here's another example that has us looking at the clientele of a certain type of business that we would like to run. So it says that Dominic is planning to run cooking classes for seniors at a community center. The town's population is 34,209 people. About 18% of the population is over the age of 60. How many students or how many potential students are there for Dominic's classes? Now, taking a look here, we know that 18% of the population is over the age of 60. So we're looking to run classes for seniors. So anyone essentially over the age of 60. The entire town's population is 34,209 people. Our first task here is to convert that 18% into a decimal. So that's going to be 0.18. So we're looking for 18% of that 34,209 people. So we're going to take the 0.18 and multiply it with 34,209 people, and we will end up with 6,157.62 people. We'll just round it down to 6,157 people. So potentially 6,157 seniors are the total clientele. Now, the second part of the question poses the question, if only 4% of the seniors are interested in cooking classes, how many students can Dominic expect? If we're looking at 4%, we're looking at 0.04. We're turning that 4% into a percentage. We're just dividing 4 by 100 to give us a decimal. And we're going to multiply that with our 6,157 seniors. So if we're multiplying those two numbers, we end up getting a grand total of 246.28. So we'll just round it down to 246 possible students. Or maybe not possible, we'll say potential. Okay, potential students. Now, I know this isn't a question that I've asked here, but you want to be thinking, okay, we're trying to figure this out at this particular time. He has 246 potential students. Are all of those students going to be going to his classes? Chances are no. He's probably looking at closer to, and this is being optimistic, if even half of them go to his cooking classes, will it be a successful business venture? Will there be enough people going and paying for his classes that he's able to keep this business running? Now, here's a couple of extra problems that you guys can work through on your own time. I want to talk a little bit about some of the costs of starting up a business. Now, there's generally two categories when it comes to those costs. First of all, we have the startup costs, which are generally one-time costs that you end up paying, and they happen before a business can begin to operate. So that's the first category. The second category are what we call operating costs, and they are ongoing or reoccurring costs that are required to keep the business running. So to give you guys a better idea of what that means, if we look at some startup costs, we can look at things like business licenses or business specific items. So hair dryers for a hairstylist or a wrench for a plumber. Some examples of operating costs are going to be things like utility payments, phone bills, or rent. Here's a very quick example. Dean is opening up a dog daycare in his community. He's researched the market and has decided that the business is feasible. List at least 5 items that Dean needs to consider as startup costs. So things that we will need to consider. Of course, we've already talked about something like a business license. We'll need to think about things like kennels for the dogs, dog food, grooming supplies, if he wants to give them at least a little bit of a treat while he's there. So grooming supplies, and potentially some toys as well for those dogs to stay busy. And we can also add on maybe some leashes as well. So these startup costs are really just anything that you're hoping, okay, once we've put the money into buying these, we won't likely need to keep spending money. You're not going to need new toys and leashes every single month. Dog food, it ends up becoming an operating cost at some point, but it is also part of your startup costs because you don't want to not have any food for any of the dogs when they start to come in. Here's another specific example. Jared has saved up $1,500 to open a house painting business that he will run out of his home. He already has a truck to use for the business, and he's listed the following expenses. We want to be able to categorize the expenses as startup costs or operating costs. So we'll go ahead and say that startup costs will say are S and operating costs will be O. A business license has been paid in full at the startup, so that's going to be a startup cost. Gasoline is per month, so that's going to be an operating cost. Vehicle insurance is by the month, so that will be an operating cost. Ladders, once you buy the ladders, hopefully you don't have to keep getting new ladders every month. Same thing with coveralls and clothes, cleaning cloths, canvas sheeting, paint brushes and trays. Your phone bill is per month, so that's going to be an operating cost. Trowels, crack filler, sandpaper is all startup costs, as well as any miscellaneous costs that are accrued as well. So you can see here there are a lot of startup costs when it comes to starting up a business. So it says here, how much money does Jared need to start his business and operate it for the first month? So what we're going to do is we're just going to total up all of those costs in that first column, and we end up getting a total of $2,060. So already before he has earned any money at all, he has to pay $2,060, and we know he only has $1,500 saved up. He needs another $560. So he may not be able to run his business or start his business right away. So he might have to do something like take out a loan or spend a little less money on certain things such as ladders or his coveralls and clothes, or just find cheaper variations of them. Now, in order to keep the business running, we have to understand how money leaves your business and how it comes into your business. There's two terms that we can use to describe that flow of money. The first one being revenue. It talks about the amount of money that is earned by a business through the sales of goods and services. Then on the other hand, when we talk about expenses, it's any type of money that is leaving the business, and that can be found in a number of areas. Those expenses can be split into two categories, either fixed or variable expenses. When we look at fixed expenses, they occur on a consistent basis and will not often change in value. On the other hand, variable expenses are often not consistent and will have their values change. So in this example here, Rafaela runs a catering service preparing and delivering frozen dinners to the elderly. During the past month, she listed the following items in her financial records. So you have a nice table there. A couple of the questions that are asked is, in the chart above, identify which items are revenue and which ones are expenses, calculate the total of each category, and we also need to classify each item as a fixed or a variable expense. So let's figure out which ones are revenue and which one are expenses. We'll just say here that for your revenue, we'll highlight it in one color, and for your expenses, we'll highlight it in another color. So we'll highlight any of the revenue in yellow. So payment from Mrs. Harrison would be one of them, payment from Mr. Dorn, payment from Mrs. Towers, a tip from Mrs. Towers, a check from Mr. Rogers, payment from Mr. Oswich, payment from Mrs. Zed. I'm not even going to try that. Zedrikowski, maybe. And we've got a payment from Mr. Ozaki and payment from Miss Lee. So we have a number of revenue sources, or really just money coming into your business. And let's do our expenses in green. So that would be essentially everything else. Now I'll leave you guys to calculate the totals for each category on your own. So let's talk about whether or not these expenses are fixed or variable. Now it's really hard to say whether things like groceries or gas for your car are going to be fixed or variable just because of how inconsistent they will be. For example, this past month, Rafaela had to go and get groceries twice. Maybe she ended up forgetting certain things at the grocery store, or maybe she was busier than expected, We don't know the situation, so most of the time, groceries would be considered a type of variable expense. Same thing for your gas from your car, food containers that you'd need. Again, unless we have a better idea of how she spends her money month after month, we'd have to consider it as a variable expense. Car insurance, very likely it's a monthly payment. Refund, probably variable. Employee salary, that can be considered a fixed expense because your employee salary is not very likely to change very much, if at all, from month to month. Your monthly fee paid for an advertisement, there it is, it's monthly. And your flat rate plan for your telephone is going to be a fixed expense. So there are three more terms I want to talk about today. The first being profit, which is when your amount of revenue generated is more than the expenses for a given period of time. On the other hand, if you don't make more than you earn, then we call it a loss. So in this case, your expenses would be more than your revenue. In the event that your revenue is equal to your expenses, then we can say that your business will break even. Another example we can look at here is where Vaughn runs a bakery and he makes baked goods that he sells to cafes. He owns the van that he uses for purchases and delivery. His revenue and expenses for 1 month are as follows. So we can see in the table there's a number of different items such as rent, wages, sales, loan payments, and so on. So we want to be able to calculate his profit or loss for the month. In order to do so, we want to be able to calculate two things. First of all, his revenue, and compare that to his expenses. Let's go ahead and highlight any of his revenue in yellow. So we'll go through our list here, figure out, okay, the only real thing that he has in terms of revenue is his sales. Pretty much everything else that we see here is going to be some sort of expense. Even his salary, because his salary is being taken out of all of the sales to his business. If we go and calculate all of our revenue and our expenses, well, our revenue is fairly simple. It's just the $10,000 that he gets from his sales. On the other hand, his expenses totals up to $10,560. So in order to calculate his profit or his loss, you want to take his revenue and then subtract his expenses, and that equals to a negative $560. So which means that he has a loss of $560 for this month. What would his sales have to be for the month for him to break even? Now, the key here is understanding that the term break even means that his revenue has to equal to his expenses, which means that his revenue or his sales has to be $10,560. If he can't increase his sales, if that's about how much he tops out around, what are some ways where he can break even? So a couple different suggestions we could have is that he could source cheaper ingredients. So instead of finding the fanciest yeast and dough and sugar and flour, he can find something a little bit cheaper. It might affect the quality of his baked goods, but it might not. Another way that he can also break even is he can also decrease his own salary. Now, again, because of all the expenses that he has to pay for, he can't afford to be at a loss. So, in some months, as a business owner, you just might have to take home a little bit less in order to keep your business running and at least break even for the month. The last part of this lesson talks about some of the factors that affect the decision making behind your business. So, for example, if you run an artisan coffee shop, sometimes you're going to have to set prices high enough to cover the expenses necessary to cover the cost of running your coffee shop, but you can't set them so high that people aren't able to buy your products. So sometimes you'll have to fiddle around with certain things to find that right balancing point, and oftentimes it'll take quite a long time to do so. So some of the things that you want to consider when you're opening a business, or rather the factors that are really important to consider, are where your business is located, where you buy your goods and materials, how much you charge for your goods and services, the variety of goods and services provided, your hours of operation or seasonal operating periods, the number of employees you have, your employee salaries, as well as the advertising that you do for your business. So I'd also like for you guys to consider at least 3 more factors that might affect the business that you want to start. Here's a comprehensive example that talks about understanding the factors that go into affecting whether or not your business will earn you money or not. Parker operates a home renovation business. He's estimated that the cost of materials for a client's renovation will cost $5,685 and that the job will take 18 hours of labor to complete. Parker is deciding whether to charge the client the cost of the materials plus $35.50 per hour or a flat rate of 115% of the cost of materials. Which option would give Parker a higher income? So we want to be able to do 2 different things here. So the first thing that we need to do here is identify the 2 scenarios that we'll be working with. The first one being that he would like to charge the client the cost of materials plus $35.50 per hour or a flat rate of 115% of the cost of materials. We want to figure out which one will give him more profit. If we consider our first situation, the cost of the materials, and let's do this as scenario 1, would be $5,685 plus $35.50 per hour. We are working with 18 hours, or working for 18 hours, and we're going to multiply that by $13.50. So we have that $5,685, and we're going to add 18 hours worth of labor, which totals to about $6,324. In scenario number 2, if we're just calculating 115%, and 115%, if we express it as a decimal, is 1.15. So all we're going to do is take $5,865, multiply it by 1.15, and maybe I'll do that in brackets. We're going to multiply that material cost by 1.15, and we will get a total of $6,537.75. So we can see here that scenario 2 would give him a higher income. Now in part B, it says, assume Parker charges the client the higher price. He hires 2 employees to complete the renovation in less time. They can complete the job in 9 hours, but Parker will have to pay each employee $18 an hour. What is Parker's profit after paying the employees? Now this is a little bit tricky because we know we're working with 2 employees. They can complete the job in 9 hours, but he has to pay each employee $18 per hour. So if we have 2 employees and they're working 9 hours each, so this is 18 hours of pay in total that Parker will have to shell out of his own pocket. So 18 hours of pay at $18 an hour. So if we take 18 and you multiply that by 18, that gives us $324. So like we said earlier, assuming that Parker took the higher rate, we're going to take the $6,537.75, and we're going to subtract that $324, and we end up with a grand total of $6,213.75. So now something interesting that I want to point out is that at the end, you do end up making the least amount of money out of all 3 of the scenarios that we talked about. But what I want you guys to consider is the opportunity and the time cost. Yes, you're making $6,000 or let's say $6,200 as your profit compared to $6,300 from scenario 1 or $6,500 from scenario 2. At the same time, you have saved yourself $18 as the boss of your own business, and you've been able to get the job done still and be able to delegate the tasks out to your employees. So is that amount of time worth the 18 hours? That is something that as a business owner operator is up to you to make. Now, 2 changes that Parker could make to earn a higher profit. There's a couple that I can think of right now. The first one obviously is to lower the hourly pay, and that would be the first one. Or he could charge a higher price. So for the last section of this outcome, we are going to look at a website/game called the Small Business Game. You can reach that by typing into your address bar thesmallbusinessgame.co.nz. So this is a web-based game that was developed by a company. It appears from New Zealand. There's no installation or anything allowed. You just need to make sure you have Adobe Flash Player enabled on your browser. If you're having issues with that, send me an email. Be more than happy to help you out. You will have to register really quickly. So all you need to do is scroll down to the bottom here and click register here. You can fill out the form here. You don't necessarily need to use your real first and last name. Use one of your personal email addresses. Confirm your email. You guys will have to click none of these schools because it appears that most of these regions and these schools are all from New Zealand. So you want to just make sure you click none of these schools. Make your own username and password. You can click or you can choose your own store team branding. So you can just go with the default Auckland City. You've read and accept the terms and conditions, and you can register. Once you've done all of that, you want to scroll back up. After you've registered, you want to click login and play. And once you've confirmed your account, you want to type in your username and your password and click login. So you'll reach the screen right here, and you'll notice that I've played a couple times, and my high score is, it's all right. But I would love for you guys to try playing the full 52 virtual weeks. You can click up here, and we'll let the game load up. So the premise of this game is that you have decided to buy a sporting goods store in New Zealand, and you've taken over from previous business owners who have poorly managed the sporting goods store. So you're going to be able to use your entrepreneurial skills to build it up over the next 52 weeks. So we'll go ahead and click go. You'll see a lot of these options here. So now what I want you guys to do is while you have your notes open, you can take a look at a couple of the different things that I want you guys to consider while you're playing this game. So think about some of the startup costs of this sporting goods store and 5 operating costs. We'll talk about the 5 sections of the store right now. First of all, we can see that we have the actual store itself. We've got a meeting or a boardroom. Over here, there's an office. We've got the break room or the staff room here, and we also have your stock room for all of your inventory for the store. You should be following along all these different questions as you go through the game. So some of them will ask you what happened after a certain point. Some of them will ask you questions, for example, finding employees. So here's a quick tutorial. If you want to hire employees for your store, you want to go to the break room, and then you want to click on this little wanted poster. There's different ways for you to look and advertise for staff. So it's really just up to you. So you can see here, there's a cost for hours for each action that you make. So you can see you have 4 here. It keeps track of your total amount of hours per week. If we look at the main store here, you can see that we can do a lot of things along here, and each one of these have an hourly cost, which is really just how much of your time it takes that week, plus the amount that you will have to pay. So notice that you'll only start off with $5,000. You want to make sure that you don't let your money get too low. Otherwise, you're going to get a visit from someone from the bank who's going to talk to you and tell you, hey, don't let your money get too low. You're not going to be able to afford the cost of running this business if you continue on like this. The idea behind this game is to allow you guys an opportunity to use some of the definitions and words and concepts to play around in a fun little store in a game setting where you can explore different aspects of business owning and see if you can get a better score than me. So that's it for today's video. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about owning and operating your own business. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.